Well, it depends on what you want to refer to. Misinformation usually will be different than disinformation. Disinformation often will mean that somebody wanted to introduce this fake piece of information into the memosphere, while if you're just misinformed, it could be by accident. You do not have to necessarily have this conscious will. While fake news is yet another phenomenon. In fake news, even people who hear this can understand that this is not necessarily true, but they think, like in this old, I think, Navajo saying, I do not know if this is what happened, but the story is true. So they think, even if facts do not actually make sense, it still falls in line with how the world works.
Esto es La Inquietud con Garrett Edwards, el lugar donde hay más preguntas que certezas.
Damos vuelta de página aquí en La Inquietud por CNN Radio Rosario. Tenemos un enorme honor, placer y privilegio. Es profesor y jefe del Departamento de Gestión en Ambientes Conectados y Digitales, MINDS por su sigla en inglés, en la Universidad Kozminski en Polonia. Es también miembro del staff en el Centro Berkman-Klein para Internet y la Sociedad de la Universidad de Harvard. Es miembro de la Academia de Ciencias Polaca, además de haber sido elegido como su miembro más joven en la historia en lo que tiene que ver con ciencias y humanidades. Ha publicado una serie de libros interesantísimos, incluyendo el más reciente en la editorial del MIT de los Estados Unidos, La Sociedad Colaborativa, Collaborative Society, con Aleksandra Przegalinska. También ha publicado Thick Big Data con la editorial de la Universidad de Oxford, Common Knowledge and Ethnography of Wikipedia con la editorial de la Universidad de Stanford. Estudia lo que tiene que ver con la desinformación, con la misinformación, con la detección de bots, y además también se dedica a la práctica porque es uno de los miembros del directorio de la Fundación Wikimedia desde el 2015. Lo tenemos del otro lado a DARIUSZ JEMIELNIAK, que nos va a estar contando un montón de todas estas cosas, y ahora voy a hablar en inglés. DARIUSZ, how you doing? Garrett Edwards over here on the other side.
Hola, how are you doing? It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Dariusz, thank you for being over there and for speaking with our audience. I'd like to start with one of the things that you have been researching, and it's always a concept that gets used a lot when it comes to colloquial talk. Is it fake news? Is it disinformation? Is it misinformation? What's the right term that we should be using when we discuss this subject?
Well, it depends on what you want to refer to. Misinformation usually will be different than disinformation. Disinformation often will mean that somebody wanted to introduce this fake piece of information into the memosphere, while if you're just misinformed, it could be by accident. You do not have to necessarily have this conscious will. While fake news is yet another phenomenon. In fake news, even people who hear this can understand that this is not necessarily true, but they think, like in this old, I think, Navajo saying, I do not know if this is what happened, but the story is true. So they think, even if facts do not actually make sense, it still falls in line with how the world works.
Dariusz, you just pointed on those three different concepts. Is fake news a new concept, or is it actually something as old as lie?
Well, this is an interesting topic, and we've been trying to get an angle at this. It's not so easy to answer. We know, for example, that even in the Roman Empire, people were spreading fake information about other people. Some very important political changes happened as a result of that. For example, Octavian was definitely, there was a lot of disinformation about him. However, with fake news, and currently we're distinguishing this, fake news is a relatively new phenomenon when the audience realizes that this may be not true, and they are still going along with it. So this is, in a sense, is a new phenomenon.
So that's really interesting. So people may realize that the information is not accurate, but they still want to believe in that information. That's a different take on the fake news dilemma, right?
Definitely. And if you think about this, when you heard this information, there was this Trump campaign, Hillary campaign, there was information that there's some kind of a gang under a pizzeria that is trying to kidnap children. Absolutely ludicrous, absolutely absurd. And most people understood it's absurd. But what they thought was, yeah, maybe this is not true, but there's something wrong with Hillary anyway. So it's basically a smearing campaign. People think, yeah, maybe this is not true, but definitely something's going on anyway.
That's also a good thing to touch upon, because, for example, Nobel Prize laureate in literature Mario Vargas Llosa has been talking a lot about post-truth, something that goes after the truth when it comes to like not necessarily in a temporary capacity, but is there something as post-truth as well as fake news?
Yeah, that's this phenomenon of post-truth and anti-intellectualism. They all are tied together. And I don't want to get too entangled in the definitions, but the phenomenon that is happening and we can observe is definitely one that people are sort of losing connection with material facts. They are following more ideologies and myths than the truth itself. And we can see it in so many different ways and levels. For example, even in medicine. So literally vital to our life. Even in medicine, people are often turning to people who are not trained in medicine, who are basically shamans, who are, well, not necessarily at all qualified to give any medical advice, but they are really good at talking. So they are good at building a narrative. Use only sun and you will live forever. Take lots of vitamin C and it will cure whatever you might be having. So this kind of narrative is, of course, very powerful and dangerous. And I think part of the process is obviously resulting from the fact that the traditional media, like that you're doing, is unfortunately being competed by TikTokers, YouTubers, and people who do not have qualifications, but they have, well, ranges. They can reach a large audience. Who cares if they are lying? Who cares if they are not qualified? The matter that matters is that they can bring something interesting. And then, of course, some people realize that this could be entertainment, but some people don't realize that this is not entertainment show. Some people realize it's actual advice. And for those who I only feel sorry for, but unfortunately, the post-truth phenomenon is resulting in people losing the connection between science, observable reality, consequences, and stories.
We actually had a lot of those taking political decisions during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's even worse than just TikTokers, as you mentioned, Dariusz. I'm going to ask the obvious, but social networks have changed how we connect with each other, maybe just because of the immediacy of it all. Do you think the fake news phenomenon would be as spread without social networks, or is social networks the main focus point of it all?
And that's a very good question. And the answer is obvious. It wouldn't be as wide for several reasons. First of all, social media business model relies on spreading news that is viral, not necessarily that is true. So by design, they are making money on stories that people want to share, want to click, not the stories that are actually verified. But there's also an additional phenomenon. On social media, you can reach people who normally would not be in your close contacts, would not be your friends, even friends of your friends. It's relatively easy to reach large audiences if you have something that people consider interesting. And interesting very often will mean contradictory to the knowledge that we have, because there's nothing interesting in saying that the earth is round. It's obvious. But if you say the earth is flat, and here is the undisputable proof I've just made, even if you do not believe the earth is flat, the chances are you're more likely to click it than not. So by design, fake news have already an advantage, but there's something more. There's worse. The social networks are making money on spreading disinformation. If you look at the anti-vaxxer communities, if you look at the totalitarian regimes, they do have big budgets. Tens of millions of dollars are proven to go through the social networks to movements that are basically professionally spreading misinformation. And this is the fourth final factor here. There are networks of actors that are basically professionals who are trained in making us believe things. And with this, with highly trained professionals, we actually do not really stand much chance as a society because we do not really have adequate countermeasures. Things that I advocate for is first, responsibility of the social networks. We need to hold them reliable for the damage they are doing. We need to have transparency. So we need to know who's paying for what, but also what kind of information is being spread. Nowadays, as we speak, none of us even knows what is happening in closed, non-public groups on the social media because, well, by definition, they are closed. There should be oversight, community oversight, research oversight, governmental oversight. And finally, of course, we need to educate people and we need to put budgets into research. The fact that research on misinformation is so heavily under budgeted currently, and there's no coordination on the institutional level, is definitely translating to the fact that we're losing war. And we need to realize this is war. War currently in the 21st century is not just the military. The war starts in the information zone. And if we're not having adequate responses there, we're already losing the war itself.
Dariusz, you just put forth a really important point. I'm going to use a term that's probably more Argentinian than worldly, but you'll understand it too because you're an expert. So you talk about troll centers in a way because you have these experts that are using their expertise to lie to us or to harass people online. And then you have the countermeasures that people do not seem to have. So what's your stand on regulation and governmental regulation when it comes to social networks, and how should it be balanced with the free internet?
And that's a good question. First of all, I do not blame the networks themselves because I think they're operating in the limits that we as a society set for them. So it's a free market, so they are operating as they can. Who should be blamed is the institutions. And I think if we do not introduce very clear regulation of what is dangerous to the society, what is like cancer, what is like tobacco, what is like chemical weapons in the social media, then we should not be expecting anything else to happen. So there needs to be a regulation of what is harmful. And we do have, of course, I'm all for freedom of speech. It's very dangerous to play this game to say we cannot speak about this or that. But we do have good examples. For example, spreading child pornography is indisputably universally not accepted. Most countries have regulations against it.
Exactly.
In many European countries, you will have regulations against spouting Nazi propaganda. There will be regulations about it. And of course, they could be abused politically. For example, in some countries, there will be regulations against socialism propaganda, which again, some might dispute, well, maybe it's going too far. But I think it is very clear we do have modalities of addressing the problem. We only need to discuss and agree what already constitutes this irreversible damage. Because just saying it's all freedom of speech, I think is going too far. But on the other hand, just saying, yeah, let the government decide is way too far, because we know that governments tend to try to be introduce police state, and we cannot allow the governments just to do that like that.
You spoke about the metaphorical wars that we are having online, but I'm going to connect it with a question that has plagued political scientists and historians for ages when it comes to technology and war, technology and the pandemic. How do you think we'd be living the war in Ukraine right now, or the pandemic, if we hadn't had the tools that we had at our disposal?
That's a good question. Actually, my team is currently working on the projects specifically related to both topics. So we're studying uniquely vaccine reception on social media and the Ukrainian crisis. We just dropped everything we were doing and we're analyzing this. And you'd be surprised how much overlap is between accounts that were previously spreading anti-vaccination sentiment and now are spreading anti-Ukrainian sentiment. It makes you think. It's almost as if some totalitarian regime had it in their best interest to destabilize the European societies, to try to create animosity against Ukrainians. And it makes you realize also that sometimes even very powerful narratives that you see lots of people saying something. Maybe it's not lots of people. Maybe it's actually one person who gave the budget and the rest is basically puppets.
We'll have to stay tuned for the results of that research, Dariusz. Connecting to another thing that you research, what's bot detection?
Yeah, bot detection is basically an attempt to determine which account on the social media is not operated by human. Because if you think about this from a business point of view, if you are to create a misinformation campaign, people are quite expensive. So hiring somebody who sits and types down, misinformation, this is expensive. It's much cheaper to have some people, but for each person have many accounts, and for each account have many bots that will be basically propagating, giving likes, giving retweets, giving shares to this kind of information, because this way you can leverage much more. And as you know, any piece of information that gets retweeted, commented, liked within the first couple of minutes, first hours, is much more visible elsewhere. So that's what you need. That's what you need bots for. And of course, detecting bots can be done by many different ways. None of them is perfect, but the easiest thing how you recognize a bot is the frequency of posting. If you post all the time, this is one indicator. Another one is just retweeting. Another one is focusing just on one topic. And I urge everyone to be aware. If you observe an account that looks maybe a little fishy, check how frequently they post, check whether they are mostly retweeting, check if they are posting anything personal. Things like personal pictures are still relatively more difficult to obtain than just a generic account that will be retweeting. So look for those signs.
I mean, I have to look for them, and I hope that they don't think I'm a bot, because I always keep posting with a lot of frequency. And
I can tell you that according to some methodologies, Elon Musk is a bot.
I mean, you could believe that if you told me. You just recently published with Aleksandra Przegalinska, who we recently interviewed on this show, Collaborative Society on the MIT Press. And I'm going to first ask you the same question that I asked Aleksandra. What is the collaborative society?
I hope I'll give the same answer that she did. So collaborative society is a phenomenon that manifests in people who do not know each other, starting collaborating on common projects, thanks to the new means of information exchange and communication. So basically, to give you an example, if you think about the perfect example of collaborative society, I'm thinking open source, I'm thinking Wikipedia, but I'm also thinking stuff that is happening right now in Poland. Currently, people self-organized without much governmental support to help Ukrainian people. And this happened as a result of Facebook group, WhatsApp, and many typical means of communication. So nothing sophisticated, no new apps, just using the infrastructure that exists to self-organize and create structures of support.
And this, Dariusz, goes beyond the sharing economy, beyond the platforms that people usually use when they think about this collaborative society, right?
Yeah, I don't like this term sharing economy. Honestly, when I think about Uber or Airbnb, to me, it's neither about sharing nor about economy. It's actually unsharing economy. If you think about this, if you own a hairdryer and your roommate asks you, hey, can I use this? And you tell them, sure, it'll be $5. Is it sharing? No, of course it's not sharing. It's just the opposite. So Uber and Airbnb actually killed the collaborative behaviors that we had. If you wanted to get a ride to the airport, you asked your friend, it was natural. Now, if you ask your friend, the only answer you'll get is, why don't you get an Uber? What are you can afford that? So this is the opposite. I'm thinking wider. Collaborative society, of course, does include for pay behaviors, and Uber and Airbnb are good examples of that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a good business model, but there are also examples of behaviors that are for free. So people want to share for free on free platforms like Wikipedia, but people also can share for free on commercial platforms. If you look at Yelp or Quora or Google Maps, you will see immediately there are platforms that are making money on it, but they are using the powerful trend of people to collaborate with each other. If you look at it evolutionary, you will see that people as species are actually wired for collaboration. We are much more collaborative than any other species in terms of collaboration with non-kin. So basically people who are not related to us.
What's the importance of reputational systems in all of these, Dariusz?
That's a very good question. Essentially, we use reputational systems because we need to solve the problem of trust. If you want, for example, on Wikipedia, if you want to trust the article, you can either use the traditional model like the Britannica, you can check where the credentials of the person who wrote this, and you either believe them or not, or you believe, the publisher that they chose the right people, or you can trust the process. Trusting the process solves the problem. If you know that the process is right, whoever wrote this is irrelevant as long as they follow the procedure. But the credentials and the creating layers of recognition is also super important, because oftentimes you want the answer of a person that basically other people trusted. So if you see on Amazon, if you on Quora, you see that the answer you're getting or the review you're reading has been written by somebody who has done a lot of it and people find it helpful, naturally you will trust it more than something else, especially since Amazon also does have a problem of bots. Bots are basically posting reviews there, and such a review is worth nothing. It's only trying to sway your opinion.
Dariusz, I spoke about this with Aleksandra Przegalinska. It has always amazed me about the internet, how almost anything you might think about, somebody has thought about it, somebody has written something. And you can see it, for example, in Wikipedia, or you could find it just by Googling and looking for something. This has to do with the collaborative society that you mentioned, right? Because people all around the world, they are thinking of things and they are sharing their thoughts, right?
Absolutely, and the fact that it's phenomenal that we all have such a huge drive to help each other. And of course, we also have the drive to be better than others, to brag, to make money, but it's not the only thing that makes us go. So it's one of the things that people do have is the need to help others out, even strangers. You write replies to people how to do things, to people who will never give anything back to you. You only do this because you want to feel good about yourself. There's nothing wrong with this. You want to feel important, you want to feel knowledgeable, but also because you want to help. And I think this drive is often overlooked. We actually need new modalities in the society, because if you look at the pandemic, for example, there was a time when people really wanted to do something and they were preparing amazing things like respirators. But which doctor is going to actually allow a homemade 3D printed respirator in their hospital? Who needs 20 different projects of respirators? Actually, some of them were done in Argentina. Some of them were done in Poland, in the US. Who needs 20? We only need one that everybody can use, but who is going to authorize this? So we see that collaborative society, powerful as it is, still requires a lot of institutional support, a lot of new ways how these things can be done so that they're effective. And there's place for corporations, very important place. The collaborative society will never supersede it. Yochai Benkler once thought that maybe Wikipedia, Linux, all those new approaches can take over the traditional modalities. I don't think it's true. I think what we can observe is basically a new way of collaborating, a new way of doing things, doing business, developing wonderful products, but it's not necessarily competing all the time with what the corporations are doing.
Dariusz, I'm 32. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you your age. I'm just pointing that out because as a kid, I remember, for example, using Microsoft Encarta, and I remember how encyclopedias evolved and how we used to have CD-ROMs and we had to put them in our computer and everything. And Wikipedia, the essential idea has been the same since its very inception, yet every year it keeps getting better and better. How is that possible?
Well, I think it's basically the very tenet of collaborative society. People are willing to share knowledge. They're passionate about it. And Wikipedia provides a very good system, a very good structure to make sure that whatever is added is worth something. It's very difficult actually to introduce misinformation to Wikipedia. We're years ahead of YouTube, Google, and many other players, because Wikipedia had this problem from the very beginning. People were trying to plant misinformation, and we had to find ways to deal with it. So I would say Wikipedia, and you probably heard about it, 2005 was already proven to have the same number of errors as Britannica in Nature magazine, Nature Studies. Since then, we're way better, 50 times bigger, and we're moving on. More than 300 language variations, projects. Very clearly, people want to share. And what current studies show as well is that the quality of information, the number of errors, the easiness of read is on par with professional sources. So the only thing I can say is it's your moral obligation, everybody. Do not tell me you do not use Wikipedia. Everybody uses it. So it's your moral obligation to contribute. And you can contribute in many ways. You can either give money. That's the easiest way, right? Easy way out. Give $30 a year and you're good. But If you are not in a position to contribute, that's fine too. You can contribute with your time. You can even correct commas, correct simple errors. This is super important. Do not even consider this to be something that you need to learn how to do. You do not even need to set up an account. Just click edit and correct it if you see a mistake. There are not many mistakes, but if you see them, correct them, because it's our common good, common goal. This is how the collaborative society can thrive, and this is how we all can benefit from it.
That's also amazing, Dariusz, because as I said, I'm 32. I remember when I went to school, when I was in high school, and Wikipedia didn't used to have the respectable image that it has now, that has been growing steadily year after year. And I'm sure that the people that are watching us or listening to us right now, when they have to search for on Google for something really quick, they will probably use the Wikipedia answer that Google offers on an issue. I even usually write WikiN just to know that it will appear at the very first. How did that change happen? Was it progressive, or was it a moment in time when Wikipedia stopped being the office, like with Michael Scott, the joke, and started being the respectable encyclopedia that it now is?
First of all, I would say that it's been very usable and very useful from the very beginning, but people's minds change very slowly. So even now in academia, there will be professors who will be saying, oh, where did you get it from? Wikipedia, ha, 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 meaning that it couldn't be true. And of course, if you tested them, if you pushed them, it would be very difficult to find an article that is inaccurate. The articles that are not super accurate on Wikipedia are usually the articles nobody cares about. So not important. Yeah, that's the truth. This is by design. If something is important to people, it will be good. If you look up on English Wikipedia, George W. Bush or abortion, so articles that are controversial, they will be oftentimes the best possible developed, because they will have sources from both ways, different angles. They will be really well developed articles. So I would say the change is still happening. If you think about this, my idea, which I've been propagating for a while, why don't we make editing Wikipedia a 10-year requirement for professors? Why not? Why don't we make Wikipedia editing the default essay exercise at universities? If you think about this, students write essays which go to the shredder. The professor has to read it all, has to check for plagiarism. All those things will be done on Wikipedia whenever they submit. And moreover, they will learn how to write an encyclopedic article. Think about this. This is the perfect academic exercise. You need to rephrase, you need to use the proper sources, you need to write a balanced article. It's not about the length, it's about the quality. So if students write Wikipedia articles, not only they will train good scholarship, they will also leave something behind, leave something for everybody to use. So instead of something going to the shredder, there will be something for the whole society to use. But again, professors, for various reasons, are quite conservative. Maybe they are also scared. Who on earth? Show me a professor who has readership even comparable to Wikipedia articles. Nobody is in this position. So we are jealous. We, the professoriate, we are jealous of Wikipedia, and for good reasons. But I think it has to change. We have to start understanding that this is the largest repository of human knowledge. This is the go-to place for when people seek academic knowledge, hands down. There's nothing else people are using practically. So if we want people to learn, we need to find ways of supporting Wikipedia. And I think it has to go on the university level, at professors level, at students level, all together. The academia needs to understand the 21st century. Everybody else is using Wikipedia. Why don't we?
Larger than the library of Aleksandra, I'm going to have to maybe copy that idea of yours for my students of editing Wikipedia instead of writing an essay. I'm going to keep that one in mind. Dariusz, I'm going to ask you the last question. We asked it out of every interviewee because the show is called La Inquietud. It's a pun in Spanish. What makes Dariusz Jemielniak restless?
Free knowledge. Think about this. We have almost 8 billion people worldwide, and most of them do not have access to free knowledge. There are even areas in this world when people do not understand what Wikipedia is. Just think. They don't have access to textbooks. They don't have access to any other free repository. They do not even know they could use Wikipedia. So what makes me restless is making sure that every human being on this planet has access to free knowledge of humankind, because this way we can actually make this world a better place.
Thank you, Dariusz, for your time. You've been really kind, and we send you a big hug from Argentina.
Thank you.
Lo teníamos a DARIUSZ JEMIELNIAK aquí en La Inquietud por CNN Radio Rosario.
Esto fue La Inquietud con Garrett Edwards. Síguenos en redes sociales y en www.edwards.com.ar.